So, hello everyone, and you're very welcome to the third episode of our Future Downey speaker series. My name is Connor Dowling, and basically the series is designed to engage Green Party members on issues that matter to them. We're delighted to be talking about the circular economy today, and this is by far the most requested topic by the members to date, which is it's great to be able to put that on and to have such an expert speaker in Claire Downey, who's joining us today. Claire is the Policy and Research Director at the Rediscovery Centre, which is the National Centre for Circular Economy in Ireland. The centre is a creative movement connecting people, ideas, and resources to support a greener, low-carbon living. Claire's background is in chemical engineering. She has over 20 years' experience in the field and has delivered multiple national and international circular economy research projects. Claire sits on the National Waste Advisory Group and the National Textiles Advisory Group. She's a member and fellow of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management and is also a board member of Green Foundation Ireland. Claire, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So but with the other sessions, Claire is going to present on the circular economy for about 20 minutes before a conversation with our local Green TD and Minister of State, Ossian Smyth, who actually has the responsibility for developing the circular economy in Ireland. Following that, then, we'll open discussions and questions from the audience. And really, this is designed as an interactive session. So if anything pops into your mind as we're going through, please feel free to put it into the chat box below. But otherwise, you can just raise your hand and we'll come to a more interactive roundtable discussion at the end. As I mentioned, the session is being recorded. So if you don't want to be in the video, just please leave your camera off. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Connor, and hello everyone. It's nice to see a few familiar faces there as well. I will just share these, so hopefully you can all see that.
Yeah, that looks great.
Perfect. Okay, great. Great to be talking to this audience as well. I'm going to plow straight into the heart of the matter and then maybe pull back out and talk a bit about the vision for the future and then what's happening now on the ground. So going straight to the heart of the matter, I want to talk about consumption, because consumption is really what is at the heart of the discussion about circular economy. But also Ireland has a very high and hard to explain level of consumption of goods. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that as we go along. A useful framework I found for thinking about consumption is to look at perhaps the device in front of you that you're using, or your mobile phone, something we use every day, and look at what it is made of. This image comes from iFixit, which is an excellent online platform that gives teardowns of all kinds of appliances and shows you how to repair almost anything, and repairability scores for products. So really, really worth looking at. But what it does show here is the teardown view of an Apple iPhone, and you can see just how many parts it's made of. In fact, an average phone is usually around 300 components and includes in its ingredients around 85% of the stable elements in the periodic table. So an incredible array of materials go into making this really complex, really functional, really valuable everyday item that we have. And those elements and those materials are extracted all around the globe. They're shipped for processing, they're refined, they're formed into parts, the parts are assembled into components, the components are assembled into the final product. There's warehousing, there's retail. There's so many processes that lead to us having this product, or businesses purchasing these products, that happen, really more or less behind the scene. And what we know about global consumption is that from the Circular Gap Report, which some of you may have heard of, produced by Circle Economy, that we are consuming about 100 billion tons of materials every year. And that figure has actually doubled since the year 2020. So it's growing at a phenomenal rate. And this has around 45% of global greenhouse gas emissions as an impact. Also, our level of consumption is associated with around 90% of biodiversity loss, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And that's because when we're talking about consumption, it's not just the consumer goods that I showed in that previous slides, but it's also about food production, agriculture. It's about fossil fuels that go into transport, the transport infrastructure itself, our built environment, solid fuels for electricity, everything that is consumed, it's extracted and processed. And so you can quickly see why these impacts are so vast, in particularly biodiversity loss, loss of habitat, due to the footprint that a lot of these activities have. But when it comes to thinking and understanding the impacts at a national level and reflecting that in our national emissions reporting, it becomes quite a bit more complicated. For example, in our Climate Action Plan 2023, in the chapter on circular economy and other emissions, the only emissions that are acknowledged or referenced are emissions associated with waste management. So the end of pipe management. And those are relatively low in the scheme of our overall emissions at around 1.4% of Ireland's total. Now, the other chapters in the Climate Action Programme do refer to the other activities related to consumption. For example, the chapter on transport, which would cover consumption of fossil fuels and materials used in transport infrastructure. This chapter on industry, of course, on built environment and so on. But they aren't, in a sense, brought together in the chapter on circular economy, which makes it harder to see, I think, really what the impact of consumption is at national level of our consumption, but also hard to understand, therefore, the potential for having a more circular economy and what that could do for our greenhouse gas emissions. The ESRI did a really interesting report last year trying to measure the carbon impacts of our domestic consumption, and it split that into two parts. The first of all, the consumption emissions where that material or product is extracted and produced domestically, and the impact of consumption of products that are extracted and produced for import. And what it found is around 127 megatons of carbon altogether were released to support consumption here in Ireland. And the majority of that happened somewhere else. Let's say the 66 megatons of carbon emissions are associated with carbon embodied in products and materials that we imported. And that means those emissions are accounted for in someone else's national emissions reporting. And I think that raises some really interesting questions around climate justice and also about accountability and how we take responsibility for these embodied emissions. So the circular economy model is trying really to tackle consumption, and it's trying to make as small as possible that raw material input in red on the top left-hand side of this diagram. Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah, keep going.
Sorry, we just had somebody join. That's fine.
Oh, that's okay. Grand. So, and what it's trying to do, this model, is really cut down on raw materials. That in turn will cut down on how much residual waste we produce. It's trying to keep our goods, our products, and our materials in circulation for as long as possible, and to regenerate nature. And maybe some of the more familiar terms I've just put around the outside. Historically, I've always thought in terms of the waste hierarchy, which was part of the Waste Framework Directive, which is first and foremost to prioritize prevention. And that's the whole right-hand side of this diagram here. Second of all, we can cut down on consumption through preparation for use, which I'll come back to in a little while. And third of all, through recycling. And you can see some of the activities in the prevention side here. It's trying to tackle design, go right to the early stages of product design and see how can we dematerialize products? How can we create systems rather than products? So for sharing, for example, so we don't all have to own a drill, but we can share it within a community. How can we design, awareness programs and inspire people to take on circular practices, as well as designing products so that they last, so that they're more repairable, and so that they're reusable, and design the return loop so that we can get them back once people have finished using them for the next user. And includes remanufacturing, trying to restore products to their original condition by returning them to manufacturing systems. It's about how do we dematerialize distribution, so taking out the packaging, removing all the losses that occur at distribution, and then how can we grow this reuse and repair loops and keep these products going for as absolutely long as possible and intensify their use as well. Historically, of course, we've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about recycling. There have been targets around recycling for a long time. It is a centralized activity, so in a way it's kind of much easier to grasp because you can get the materials and process them, as opposed to trying to deal with these really complex supply chains all the way back up again. However, we have seen in the last 3 to 4 years a real shift towards prevention, preparation freeze, towards the more circular economy, and recycling, really should be the very last resort. So building on this momentum, I'll talk a little bit about the Rediscovery Centre itself. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with us. It is a national centre for circular economy, as Connor said, and we aim to bring together people, ideas and resources to lead the transition to a circular economy in Ireland. And you can see the Centre of Excellence, or the Demonstration Centre in Ballymun on the left-hand side, and I really would encourage you to come and visit if you haven't already. We tried to achieve these goals, the big goal of leading the transition, in 4 different areas. First of all, through education. So we have an education team working with primary and secondary and tertiary levels, supporting teachers, working on curriculum, providing STEM sustainability workshops in schools, as well as adult education, so running workshops, for example, and on-the-job vocational training. And I'll come back to that point again as well, because really social enterprises in Ireland are very important in kind of nurturing those skills, the circular economy skills that we're going to need in the future. We also are a demonstration centre, as I mentioned. We have the centre itself, which all the way around the building shows different ideas and hopefully inspires people around what you could do in the circular economy at a practical level. And we have 4 workshops within the building on fashion, furniture, paint, and bicycle repair and reuse. And those allow us to demonstrate to visitors principles of repair and reuse in those areas, but also models for businesses that can be replicated around the country. And we've helped to start a paint reuse network, supporting other organizations around the country to take reuse unwanted paint from civic amenity sites and reuse it. Obviously, we can't do this alone. This is an immensely complex area, as I've tried to show in the first few slides, and we absolutely have to collaborate across all sectors and at all levels. So collaboration is a real important part of our work to help deepen the movement, and we collaborate with public sector bodies like the Department of Environment, the Environmental Protection Agency, Science Foundation Ireland, Department of Rural Community Development, as well as with other social enterprises and with the community at large. So really trying to leverage all of the knowledge that's out there and the innovation. And finally, we work on advocacy. So in my team, I'm responsible for research, and we're trying to develop the evidence base to help policymakers and support policy change, and also to help businesses and citizens to identify more sustainable ways of living and models for doing so. So that's what we're doing. And ultimately, where we want to get to is a circular economy that is affordable for everyone, businesses and citizens, communities, that is viable to run as an activity if you want to have a circular economy business or social enterprise, that it is attractive, so people want to take on these practices, they want to, for example, buy secondhand to repair, to avoid, and that it is really accessible, that it is very easy to do simple steps in this area. So what I want to do is share 2 examples of a future where circular economy is affordable, viable, attractive, and accessible in 2 different sectors. First of all, in the built environment. So the Irish Green Building Council has produced a really excellent report called Building a Zero Carbon Ireland. And it includes some very interesting data that was not really available before that, showing that the built environment is responsible for around 40% of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions, and around 15% altogether is due to the carbon in the materials we use in construction. So a really huge impact is associated with, all of our built environment, roads, building structures, and so on. But what we also know from this report and from lots of other work is that the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. So I wanted to use this example of the Rediscovery Centre building, which actually formerly, as you can see on the left-hand side, was a boiler house, an actual boiler house that raised hot water for the district heating scheme for the flats in Ballymun, around 3,000 flats. And what the Rediscovery Centre did is leverage the money it would have cost to demolish that building, add some European funding, and create this Centre of Excellence that we now have out in Ballymun. And one of the key principles of the design of this building, and should be the key principles of all buildings in this future of circularity, is to reuse as much as possible. And so all of the concrete floors, all of the steel girders in this building were retained, and that saved around 55 tons of carbon. Another really interesting principle that we're starting to see that will be absolutely mainstream in the future is treating buildings as material banks. So knowing exactly what all of the fixtures, fittings, materials are within a building, so that in future, if the building is redeveloped, if it is deconstructed, that you can harvest all of these fixtures and fittings and materials for onward use, for repurposing, for use in other buildings. So absolutely understanding the full inventory of all of the products and materials that are out there so that they can continue to be used as much as possible. The other principle that was used is to use as much as possible from other buildings. So kind of building on this idea of buildings as material banks, we'll need exchanges where those materials are able to be exchanged. So we have, for example, somewhere online or somewhere physically where fixtures and fittings or surplus materials from buildings, from deconstruction or construction projects can be stored and matched with new projects that might need them as part of their design. So at the moment, we're starting to see this emerge in Ireland, which is fantastic. The Irish Green Building Council has developed the CMEX, which is the Construction Material Exchange, which is an online platform trying to match these surplus materials or fixtures and fittings from deconstruction with new builds. And we also have the Habitat for Humanity, which is a social enterprise and charity based in Drogheda. They actually have 5 restores in Northern Ireland, but their first store in Ireland is now in Drogheda, and that is a warehouse DIY secondhand and surplus store. So they're able to go in and rescue kitchens, bathtubs, doors. They take in surplus tiles and all kinds of materials. If you're into DIY, it's a real wonderful place to visit that people can then use in their own building projects and renovation projects. And then finally, where things can't be reused, we look to sustainable materials in this future circular vision. For example, hempcrete, and Rediscovery Centre was the first public building to use hempcrete, sheep's wool insulation, and all of that will drive the demand and support, more local production, more local jobs in these areas. The next circular vision I wanted to share is in textiles. And we've been involved in quite a bit of research around textiles in the last couple of years. First of all, there was a project called NATEX, which is the nature and extent of post-consumer textiles, which really just set about to try and put numbers on this, because we had no idea how much we're consuming and how much we're throwing away and where it's going. So this was an EPA-funded piece of work, and what it found is that Ireland has a really high level of consumption of textiles, and we're not exactly sure why still, or indeed if all the data being used is comparable and so on and so forth. But it kind of aligns with some other figures that we're seeing around Ireland's consumption levels. So we're at around 53 kilos per person. What the study also found is that we're disposing, so throwing into our primarily the black bin through household or commercial practices, around 110,000 tons of textiles, and that compares with our exports. So we're exporting for reuse to markets in Africa and Asia, around 35,000 tonnes. And we're recirculating for reuse locally in Ireland through charity shops, for example, through online platforms, through vintage stores. We think around 9,000 tonnes. So that means 65% of all post-consumer textiles are destroyed or dumped, and around kind of 35% go for maybe reuse or maybe lower applications. So one thing, and the first thing in the circular vision for the future for textiles, is we absolutely have tackled this issue of consumption, because what is driving exports and what is driving dumping is our extremely high level of consumption. And one thing we've seen over the last, say, 10 years is a continuous decline in quality of textiles as well. So what that means is, first of all, people don't want to buy it secondhand because it is already poor quality, and they can buy another poor quality item for the same price. And also it means that we're sending really poor quality clothes to other countries, to other markets, with the hope that they'll be able to reuse it. But the European Environment Agency put out, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, or maybe it was a month ago, a report that really looked at where our clothing is going and what's happening to it. And it did find there's a lot of practices in these export markets where they are, it is ending up in landfill, or it is ending up being dumped. And I don't think that is necessarily the whole responsibility of the markets that are on the receiving side. And we absolutely have to tackle that through addressing consumption here, through awareness, and through making the sustainable choice much easier. The other thing we need to do, of course, is make clothing designed better. And through the Sustainable Products Initiative, there's a consultation exercise now looking at where should eco-design regulations go next. They've been focusing really on electrical goods, trying to make them easier to repair and trying to make them better designed to last. And the Commission, it seems, is probably going to look to garments next. And that will mean that manufacturers will be required to design textiles so that they last properly, so they don't get destroyed after 2 or 3 washes, and so that they're much easier to repair as well. They're designed for repair. So hopefully that will start to see a shift around this kind of quality issue. We also need to see reuse and repair, of course, becoming much easier, more affordable, more accessible. Interestingly, the right to repair and movement, and this applies not just to textiles, but to so many areas of especially consumer goods, is published a really good blog on the initiatives that are happening in other member states to make repair affordable. So repair bonuses, repair grants, and lower VAT to help encourage people to try out repair. We also need better systems to deal with the volumes of textiles that are coming back into the system. And it's not just the volumes that we're seeing at the moment, which is around 45,000 tonnes that's being sorted for reuse. But with the Waste Framework Directive, there is a requirement that all member states have to implement separate collection by 2025. So we have to have more systems for collecting textiles separately by 2025. And if we do that, it does raise questions as to what we're going to do with all these additional textiles. The Community Resources Network undertook a major project with EPA Green Enterprise funding that we were a part of, and Clean Technology Centre was a part of, that tried to look at what does that look like? What does separate collection look like for textiles? How easy do we have to make it? Is it, door to door, or is it, having more drop-off points in shopping centres, or what? And also, what are we going to do with all these textiles that we collect? And what it found is that we really aren't very well prepared for separate collection. And when you think about the numbers, if we even take 10% out of what's going into the bin currently, we would have to double the amount of reuse that happens locally if that was all reusable. So there will be huge pressure on the system. And the report found that we absolutely have to invest in more infrastructure, in sorting infrastructure, in handling all of these textiles, invest in systems for recycling, for downcycling, for reusing it locally, and also really help build a more coordinated used textile sector. So at the moment, the exporters and the local secondhand retailers don't really connect very often. So quite a bit of work is needed to get to this place where we have a far more, I suppose, mature reuse sector. And finally, we need reuse to be viable. We're delighted to see through various policy measures, which I'll talk about soon, reuse targets on the radar, national reuse targets, and these are incredibly important. We were involved in a bit of research to look into the levels of reuse to help establish targets called Q2Reuse, again with CRNI and CTC, and spoke to the sector quite widely. And this really revealed that a lot of reuse activity struggles to compete with the low cost of new products. And we need to invest not only in infrastructure, but also in reuse operations. Now, that sounds like a whole load of more money, but actually we subsidize very heavily recycling already. And we don't have any equivalent supports or subsidies in this, far more important area of reuse and repair. So I suppose what that research found is that we do need to sort of explore ways that we can try and do that. And lastly, for the items that we can't reuse, because we do expect there is quite an amount of clothing certainly in circulation now that is simply not rewearable, we need to find alternative solutions for that. And this can generate jobs and real business opportunities locally as well. For example, the image I've shown here is from a really interesting organization in New Zealand called Usefully, who use the cellulose value in used textiles to replace cellulose that's used as a road base. So they've been doing some really interesting trials there. There's an organization in Ireland looking at textiles as part of an insulation that they're producing. And then, of course, there's other applications like sound barriers, rugs, carpets, and so on. So lots of ways that these can be used, but as I said, it won't all be reusable. Okay, so that's the vision. I wanted to just touch on where we are now, or what we know about data now. As I was trying to show at the start, it is very difficult to get data and a full picture of circularity and what it means and what it looks like and where we are. And we don't really have necessarily a full dashboard yet. And I think it'll be really interesting if we could get lots and lots of indicators that show progress in this area. What I've put up here is the data that we do have. We did some surveys through behavior and attitudes last year, thanks to European Life Funding and Department of Environment support, that we're looking into people's understanding of circular economy. And this found that around 25% of adults have heard of the term, and less than 10% really could describe it. So one thing we do know is we have a long way to go in terms of awareness, knowledge, and inspiring people to do more circular, practices in their daily lives. I've talked about consumption. Here is the big figure here. Our domestic material consumption, or DMC, per person is amongst the highest in Europe. So across the board, we have very high consumption levels in Ireland. Our reuse rate, which is a figure that came from the research I mentioned before called Q2Reuse to help establish a baseline for reuse targets, is around 6.5 kilos per person. It's quite hard to compare this figure to other member states because everybody measures it differently. But what you can compare it to is the figure on the right-hand side of how much waste we're producing per person, which is around 642 kilos. And so we're at about a 1% reuse rate out of all of the stuff we get rid of. One other thing I think is important to point out is that we have no preparation for reuse. I mentioned preparation for reuse before in that circle. What it means is things that have been deemed to be waste, so things that have become waste that you then try and pull back out of the waste system and return to the market, sell back again through repair, for example. Typically, in the system that we have here in Ireland, the main product category that would qualify for preparation for use is electrical goods. So at the moment, our electrical goods, I'm sure some of you are familiar with, can be returned to retailers through the take-back schemes. But every single item that is returned through take-back schemes is destroyed for recycling, even if it is functional. And some studies over in Germany have shown that the take-back of electrical goods and looked at the kind of quality of the goods that are returned and found that at least 15% of what's returned is perfectly functional and even with minor repairs could be reused. However, unfortunately, we don't have any preparation for reuse centres or easy ways of doing it. And so all of that equipment is destroyed. And that amounts to about 2 million appliances or electrical items per year in Ireland. Our circular material use rate is a topic of hot conversation in the circular economy strategy, which is Ireland's strategy, whole of government strategy. We have a goal to increase our circular material use rate to above the European average by 2030. So what does this measure? What it looks at is how much are we essentially recycling locally? How much material are we returning into consumption locally as a proportion of our overall domestic material consumption? So essentially what it means, of course, as I've said, domestic material consumption is very high in Ireland, and how much we're recycling locally is perhaps lower than other countries. So it comes out that we have a very low circular material use rate. It's not exactly clear if everyone's reporting the same way and what the data means truly, if it were to be compared on an equal footing. We're doing some research at the moment with the EPA to try and investigate and dig into this figure and understand it a bit better. But I suppose it doesn't really capture a lot of the prevention activities, distribution loops and reuse and repair that do occur. It does talk about consumption, which is very important, but yeah, I think as a measure, it can be used with other measures to really show what circularity feels like. A lot of our recycling is on track, but municipal waste continues to grow. In the last 5 years, it grew by 400,000 tonnes out of a total of 3.2 million tonnes. So it is a big challenge, and we absolutely need to reverse that trend. Okay, what's being done about it? There is a huge amount happening if you're interested in policy at both European and national levels, which is very positive. You may have heard even this week and last week, a lot of new developments happened. I suppose in terms of the frameworks, we have the European Circular Economy Action Plan, CEAP. We have a Sustainable Product Initiative, which is seeing, as I said, manufacturers being required to design things to last, design things for repair. It's looking at labeling, it's looking at greenwashing. There's a huge amount happening under that, as well as the textile strategy. We also have the Social Economy Action Plan, SEAP, which is recognizing the role of circular economy as well. So there's more and more joined up thinking as well at European level. At a national level, we have a dedicated ministerial post, which is unusual among other member states and shows a real commitment to this area. We have dedicated units in the Department of Environment to tackling circular economy. We have a Circular Economy Act, a whole of government circular economy strategy, circular economy program, and we're expecting to see in the next month the new National Waste Management Plan for Circular Economy, which is definitely the longest acronym of all of them, being published, and that will include these reuse targets that I mentioned earlier. So we're really looking forward to that. We're also seeing more investment, more joined up thinking at national level as well around labour activation schemes. So community services program in particular has 2 pilot projects, one specifically dedicated to supporting bike repair and bike maintenance skills, and one now that's just come out specifically dedicated to supporting the traveller community working in circular economy. So great to see all these joined up thinking. And there's a more and more focus on coordinating awareness, behavioural change, education in this space. A lot of the design work supporting better design of products is at European level in the common market. And that is, as I said, through the Sustainable Products Initiative. Also, the restrictions roadmap is trying to remove hazardous ingredients from products, and the packaging directive looking at how packaging can be more and more reusable. We have a lot of work in remanufacturing. The Right to Repair directive was just published this week, as you may have seen some reactions to it. That's the Commission's efforts to try and avoid the replacement of products in warranty. They're trying to make sure manufacturers take things back for repair, both in warranty and outside of warranty. We have at national level a food waste prevention roadmap that's trying to tackle food loss right from farm level down to fork. And there's a great enabler there as well in the area of manufacturing, which is Circulaire, the circular manufacturing platform. that some of you may have heard of. Again, in distribution, trying to dematerialize it, remove all the packaging. We have the Sustainable Products Initiative looking to ban the destruction of unsold goods. That's another example where things get lost or wasted in that distribution process. We have the upcoming latte levy or levies on single-use items as well. So it's starting with coffee cups. In the future, there may also be levies on other containers, for example, and indeed bans on that. So really stripping out the single-use plastics. There's a lot going on in reuse and repair, as I mentioned. Great excitement around upcoming reuse targets, which were provided for in the Circular Economy Act and which will be, I suppose, set in the National Waste Plan. A repair roadmap is due out as well, or intention to develop a repair roadmap, and then using civic amenity sites as reuse hubs. And then we absolutely need to see demand being driven through green public procurement. So there's a lot in there, and I can come back to any of these. Sorry for kind of blasting everyone with policy here. Just some enablers there, of course. So we see ourselves helping support particularly citizen engagement, demonstration, and also just to flag, Community Resources Network has a project called Remark, which is trying to develop a quality mark for reuse. And what that's tackling is this kind of negative consumer perceptions around secondhand goods. Okay, Connor mentioned there was interest in how do we make all this affordable and viable? How do we make the choices easier for people? So I just wanted to touch on 3 points before wrapping up. One is that we need to support operations and not just innovation. A lot of funds are designed to support starting up new projects and testing new projects, but we now really need to see this whole area grow. And so some way of supporting, you know, per ton or some kind of operational support that we've seen for recycling, and we've seen it in renewables, and we've seen it in so many sectors that it can really help these activities to take off. Investment in infrastructure, as I've discussed, partnerships and supports with national bodies to show that real commitment to this area. I've mentioned labour activation schemes and how they're increasingly starting to support specifically circular economy activities, which is really important because they are the backbone. Labour activation is really upholding a lot of reuse activity at the moment. There are around 700, 800 trainees under CE schemes, 2 schemes, community services programs that are in this sector, reuse and repair sector, you know, helping to support operations. And it's really important to recognize that. We absolutely need to drive demand. We have a good culture of donation, but we don't have a good culture of buying secondhand, and we can't just put into the system without taking out on the other end. We need to see more green public procurement at local scale, at small scale, because that is the scale that a lot of these activities are taking place at the moment. This choice has to be easy for consumers to drive demand. And things like taxes and subsidies, can we remove you know, subsidies from like virgin plastic, for example, and ring fence funds to help make it affordable for people to make these choices, like for repair. And finally, there's already a huge amount of knowledge out there. There is a huge amount of funding, and there's a lot that we can leverage. Collaboration between all the sectors, between all of the different stages of the product life cycle. We can coordinate funding, European funding, the social enterprise funding, innovation funding, so much that can kind of be used to address circular economy. And then finally, Ireland has a fantastic culture of business innovation and community spirit, and I think there's a lot we can do to build on that as well. Just to plug again, Community Resources Network has developed this virtual trade fair, which is trying to connect procurers with green and social products and services, so reused, repaired and recycled products and services. So it's all online as a 24-hour virtual platform, really interesting and worth visiting. You can see from their website. Lastly, but not least, we're really excited about the upcoming Circular Economy Hotspot at the end of May into June. It will be a week of programs supporting collaboration, highlighting the innovation, the work that's happening here in Ireland, and that's being supported by the Department of Environment, Dublin City Council, the regional authorities, ourselves, and Circular. So I will stop there. Hope I didn't go too over time.
Thanks,
And
Claire.
open to any questions.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant stuff. I think fantastic to see that there is so much going on. I think a little bit of a scare at the start when it sounds like Ireland's a bit of a laggard, as with so many green things, but that now we're picking up pace and sort of catching up with a lot of our new initiatives. I'd like to, I suppose we have about 20 minutes left, so maybe a 10-minute chat with our minister who's responsible for the circular economy, Ossian Smyth, and then we'll open up to questions. So if you have any questions, guys, please just throw them into the chat box. And we also do have a few from people who sent them in before, so we'll get to those as well. Thank you again, Claire.
Hi, thanks, Connor, and thank you, Claire. That was really interesting. It covered all the stuff that I'm working on, and I'm not going to talk to you for 10 minutes. I'll let the people at the meeting ask questions. Just one thing though is the Rediscovery Centre, the place where you work. I think it's got it does four kind of things. It does 4 streams. It recycles bicycles, paint, clothing, and furniture, and it trains people up in those skills, and then it either gives them away or sells the products afterwards. So you have this lovely model going on in your renovated building. Do you think that's a model for the rest of the country? Like, can you reproduce that? And what's your vision for that? Should it be reproduced in every county in Ireland, or does the Rediscovery Centre need to do more products, or where do you see that? Where do you see that going next?
Yeah, well, I guess we absolutely need to grow reuse in any case. We have designed the workshops to show how, I suppose, it can be done and to be replicated. So in the case of paint reuse, we've been able to support other social enterprises to start paint reuse activities, like the bike reuse project down in Skibbereen, like the furniture reuse project in Longford. So we've kind of actively engaged and supported that type of activity. But there are a lot of existing reuse activities around the country, and there's no intention at all for the Rediscovery Centre to plonk itself in every county. In Dunleary, you have the Bike Hub, which is on the line, which is a fantastic bike reuse project already. And we see that around the country too. There are listings of that type of activity under the Community Resources Network. So it's a little bit to see where the gaps are, where the centre as a national centre can support more activity, can show how the models can be replicated through our Circular Economy Academy, for example. We can directly support organisations, but also to see and really showcase what's already there and what already could be built on.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. I won't ask any more than that. I'll let anybody else who wants to go ahead and ask questions. I'll hand back to Connor there. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, the first question in is just about who do we think the leaders in the space are internationally, and like who's best in class that we should be trying to follow?
Yeah. The reason for hesitation is because we don't have a lot of really comparable figures, data. So it's quite hard to say, oh, these guys are absolutely definitely the best circular economy country in the world, because we don't have any ways of comparing how we measure them. The circular material use rate is one measure that's used to compare. As I said, it reflects consumption and it reflects domestic recycling. So it doesn't really capture everything. And in that one, the Netherlands is doing by far the best. We know that the Flanders region of Belgium has had reuse targets for years, has been working hard in this area and doing amazing things on procurement. We know Ireland and the UK have very strong charity retail cultures. We don't have any way of comparing that to other countries, but anecdotally, when you go to visit other countries, you don't see nearly as many outlets in every village and every corner. So, you know, there's probably areas we're doing quite well in, and other areas where, yeah, it's more embedded in the culture. And I think Netherlands is probably kind of up there.
Brilliant. Just from the chat, John Cross is wondering, many textiles are blends of materials, e.g. cotton, acrylic, and are difficult to recycle. Are there any measures envisaged to encourage or force manufacturers to reduce production of such goods?
Yeah, I think we'd like to see that sustainable products initiative, if it does tackle garments, if we do see European kind of efforts with the eco-design regulations to look at garments, that they would require the blends be at least standardized, you know, if not reduced in the level, the extent of variety, because it is the huge barrier to recycling, you know, but it's also a barrier to reuse, because it's quite hard to sort different qualities. And but yeah, there's no real magic bullet to that. It has to come from that eco design.
Brilliant. Two questions. One from before the chat, just looking at what specifically maybe a Dún Laoghaire Rathdown or other local authority could do. But I think, and you mentioned it already, we have Stephen McManus on the call from the Bike Hub, which is a great initiative from Dún Laoghaire Rathdown, supported. Maybe Stephen, would you like to talk about sort of how you got set up and what sort of supports you would need to sort of expand?
Yeah, okay. I hope we have some interesting information about this. Well, the startup was like putting a giant puzzle together, because we were not only trying to address circular economy, but we're also trying to address, you know, social issues, inclusion, and so on, ageism in society, the adoption of cycling as a more sustainable mode of transportation. It was a big challenge at the very start, because we found that our social KPIs could not be burdened by commercial needs. So the whole business lacks total alignment, or any alignment, between where the money comes from and where it goes to. Which took us about 1.5 years to find a model that will work. Ultimately, we find today that about 80% of our income is actually commercial, as opposed to grant aids or donations. It was a big challenge, and I think from a social enterprise perspective, that's a huge win when you get to the point that you are depending on, you can control your own destiny. Through partnerships with authorities and some government support, we did manage to hit our targets with far less income that we were expecting, or that we were aiming for. And we developed the whole thing, hopefully, with an ambition of going national and replicating the model, reusing the systems, the tools, the processes. That's been quite challenging to get to the point where it's efficient, where it works, and we feel we're there now. So we are in the process. We are on our second hub, but we're in talks for another 3 hubs that could open still this year. And our objectives are quite ambitious in terms of circularity and in terms of social inclusion through cycling. Yeah, it's been successful so far. It hasn't been easy, but definitely worth the effort. Very entertaining, actually.
No, it's a fantastic example. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that. Just a few more questions. Brian has a comment that it's a really interesting presentation, and just to say that if 10% of people can't explain what the circular economy is, even when they want to talk about it, just shows the level of education that's needed. And I think that's really where the Rediscovery Centre comes in. Similar enough question from Sarah. Where can people like me who want to drive a circular society attitude in my local community go for support? If you're not an enterprise or you're not part of a bigger group, is there something like a circular community program that local people or neighborhoods could actually get involved with?
Yeah. And Brian also mentioned the number of acronyms used in the presentation. I do apologize for that. There are a lot in this area. In terms of supporting communities, there are quite a number of local authority funds out either now or in the near future that can support local initiatives. In terms of, so one of them is Community Foundation Ireland, which I think is going to come out with the fund for circular economy projects again this year, as it did back in 2019, I think it was, or 20. And there is the CCAP Community Climate Action Programme Strand 1 funding, which is also administered through local authority, which of course ties into circular economy for all the reasons I mentioned. In terms of having ideas to inspire local communities, the Community Foundation Ireland, I think, is putting together some resources that will kind of show all the different things you can do in your local area. But in the meantime, you're very welcome to come to the Rediscovery Centre, and we do try and show real practical examples as well of what people can do. We're part of a Community Climate Action Programme Strand 2 project, which is allowing us to work with our local community in Ballymun and support them to try out different ideas. So that includes, like, you know, everything from swap shops, real simple local ideas, to workshops, to having you know, maybe looking at lending libraries and so on.
That's great. I think another really practical example, maybe Ossian, you'd like to talk about the bottle return scheme that's going to be coming out soon.
Yeah, how are you doing? I'll just say about the bottle return scheme that it's for plastic bottles and for aluminium cans. It'll be ready at the end of the year, but throughout the year you'll see machines going around the country to supermarkets. Something that's been running in Germany for 20 years and in Sweden for 40 years. So we don't have the risk of doing something that hasn't been tried before. And there's been a lot of international, checking up with how things work there. So I'm expecting that that's going to be something that's long overdue and will be very welcome and popular with the public. I have Tom Kivlahan here beside me, Councillor Kivlahan, who wants to ask a question as well, if it's okay.
Hey Claire, haven't seen you for a long time.
Hi Tom.
Not too bad. What was I going to ask now? In relation to the tax treatment of repair businesses, do you think there's something that the government could do there? And I don't know if you've any comparisons with other countries that are, looking at circular economy businesses, like VAT on repaired goods that may need to be used to kind of lower prices a bit to encourage people to recycle. And the second question is around education. Is on Tashka, they do flags for everything. Have they started the flag for circular economy and kind of educating kids at that age what we mean by circular economy and good eco design?
Yeah. On the VAT issue, let's say every way we can of making things more affordable is important. In Ireland, the way a lot of certainly charity registered organizations work is that they don't have to charge VAT on secondhand goods. So at the moment, when you go into a charity shop, you don't have to pay VAT on a secondhand item that you purchase. And a lot of sort of secondhand items are sold that way, which takes the whole VAT argument out of it. However, for repaired goods, yeah. And I know certainly some, for example, laptops that are taken in, repaired and sold on again, do the labor involved is VAT applicable, and so VAT does apply. And definitely in that case, it would be very helpful to see VAT relief for commercial repair services and for those types of repair activities. It has happened in Sweden, and I just haven't gotten back to reading any reports on how successful that's been. It's been a little bit mixed. So I think, yeah, maybe it just needs to be really carefully tailored to make it really effective. I'm not sure, but as I said, anything that addresses affordability, especially of repair, is really important. Antashka, I'm not sure. I remember talking to them a while ago about circular economy as part of their flag, but I'm not sure if it's been rolled out yet.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Tom. The next question is about a return scheme. So in France, they don't allow the destruction of unsold goods. Would that be something that we should be looking at in Ireland? Would it have a big impact?
Yeah, I mean, manufacturers shouldn't be destroying unsold goods. Absolutely. There's some kind of, existing relationships in Ireland between some of the bigger, and I'm just talking about charity retailers because I know that area a bit better than the wider commercial space, that already work with with some of the big retailers. So the surplus stock is taken in by quite a lot of charity shops, and I know Oxfam has been very good at this, and sells it through those shops. So obviously overcoming the kind of, often retailers have jitters about having their brands in charity shops selling lower cost than their shops just down the road. But that seems to be working okay here. In France, we've heard that the manufacturers or the retailers that have unsold stock that might otherwise be destroyed are kind of dumping them on charities and social enterprises and receiving a tax break for the donation. So it hasn't really completely stopped the overproduction, which is the big issue. So again, it's where it sounds like a great idea and it should work, but somehow it's had some unintended consequences, which are now the charities are reeling with too many surplus stock items and aren't being able to, reuse as much as they want to do, which is what they were set up to do. So again, it's down to the design of the policies around it.
Two questions here. One is on what the plan is for the Rediscovery Centre for the next 5 years, and if there are plans to spread it out, one per city or something like that. And then the second question is for Ossian, if you could please update on the latte levy, if that's due to be rolled out anytime soon, what the plan there is. So Claire, to you first.
Well, domination. So yeah, I mean, we have a 5-year strategy, which is to continue to grow, certainly education offering at national level, research, and so on. We are doing a feasibility study on how to, or what form, hubs around the country might take, but we don't have any real answers to that yet. So I'll let Ossian talk to the latte levy.
Yeah, hi. There's the levy on disposable cups is to come in the summer. There'll be a kind of a 3-month period for the cafes and the public to get used to it. So that we said we'd give some kind of a handover period. We've had a public consultation and we've had thousands of responses. And I'm going to issue the regulations based on the responses that I got. So I'll be kind of finalising what the rules will be. So it'll be during the summer. And it's not a latte levy, of course. It's a levy on cups. Your latte should get cheaper because you won't have to buy a cup from the coffee shop. And I'm hoping the coffee shops will come around to the idea that they don't have to buy millions of cups. So that's coming this summer.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see coffee shops already bringing in the reusable cup systems and getting ready for that. So the shift is really happening quite quickly. Well, with that, we're pretty well at the top of the hour, so I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much again to our speakers and to Ossian, Tom, and Claire for all their contributions. Another great session, and yeah, we'll look forward to the next one. This will, of course, be uploaded onto our YouTube and shared, so it will be available. And thank you again to everybody for joining us. Cheers.